Welcome to Totally Classic. I am Brendan McNamara.
And I am Andy Swindler.
And today, man, what is the actual question we're asking? Oh, is Palestine Israel solvable? Is that the question? Or can Israel Palestine be solved?
Yes.
Yes. So, wait, is that the answer? Is that yes, that is what our question is? How easy would this episode be if we could be like, yep, it is. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, coming out to this evening.
Actually, I think we went with a different question. I think we said, can Palestine be free?
Oh, there we go. I think I like that one better. That's a
Yeah.
better one that we came up with. Good job, past selves. Can Palestine be free is the question of the day. Obviously, we're talking about Israel, Palestine. We are going to do our best to let's leap right into it. Let's go. My proposition of an outline. Are you pulling the outline up, or do you already have it?
No, I was silencing my phone.
Oh, okay.
Really
So
rigid studio best practices.
yeah, absolutely. So what I've been doing, actually, I've just been cleaving to this lately. It's actually really helped me understand some things with my wife and my personal life. I'm going to call this this approach cleaning the room, cleaning your room first. My wife is a little, I have considered it somewhat obsessed with like visual cleanliness, declutter, cleaning, that sort of thing. I don't, that sort of stuff doesn't super matter to me. I can think pretty clearly in a chaotic space. She cannot. I've often thought it was like, okay, that's just her gig or whatever. That's your deal. My dad's like that too. I've never really understood it. It's just like, whatever. That's just what they're like. And I can understand the why. I just don't like deeply understand it. 2 or 3 weeks ago, I started to understand it when I realized I do need the same, just like she needs a clean, like workspace in order to begin working, thinking, apprehending undistractedly. I need that ideologically. So if a concept comes up or a thesis is presented or people start arguing about something, I find it very difficult to like even focus on what in the world we're talking about until we can like clean the room. We can like broom the room of all the malarkey. And we sort of did this on the abortion episode. And I realized I was like, oh, this is very much, for better or worse, a window into how my mind works. Is I'm like, oh, okay, well, before we begin, let's get rid of everything that doesn't need to be here. I think this is great actually for business too. Let's get rid of every employee who does not need to be involved in this operation. Anybody who needs to, let's get, like, I don't know if you've been in interminable like meetings, business meetings, like in a corporate setting or whatever, even a collective setting, and you realize there's too many people here.
Or they used
So
this website. I'm really sad this died, I guess, but it was called Meet or Die,
yeah,
meetorDie.com, I believe. And it was actually really well designed. And it was like, okay, who's in your meeting? And
yeah,
as you added people, it had this like monster on the left, and he would
yeah.
get angrier and angrier and angrier. So it had this like cute, I don't know, emotional kind of conveyance, but then it also was
Yeah.
adding up the quantifying the expense of your meeting as
Oh
you
wow. Yeah. Yeah.
named people and titles, and so you get to the end and you're like, wow, that was a $3,000 meeting, and this monster is very, very angry.
Yeah.
This is the problem.
Yeah. That's a great way to think of it. I like that. I mean, obviously not really feeding two people to real monsters, but it would be fun to at least feed people to a cartoon monster and take your costs down.
Yep.
So my goal with the outline was uh, surveying over the past month. Things have changed actually quite a bit over the past month, but even this list sort of began a month ago when I was like, okay, these are popular arguments that people need to stop having, or popular theses that people need to stop having. And I don't think we agree on them all, but I was like, let's bring them all up and try to see. It's almost like picking things up and being like, hey, is this really relevant, or is this just like super distracting? And then if not, like, let's dispose of it. So if nothing else in this conversation, y'all, this might be a helpful technique for anybody listening at home who's like, how do I talk about these things? I think you can find common ground often most swiftly in, hey, what things aren't relevant here? Like accusing people of anti-Semitism or accusing people of Islamophobia or blah, blah, blah. You know, these sort of tribalistic things, those are easy. You can actually find points of agreement easier. But I don't want to do that. Let's start. I was going to say, hey, let's rule of threes and end up at genocide. But let's just start with genocide. Because I think we just
real quick though,
go.
you hinted at a piece of context that might be useful, just in case somebody's
Yeah.
dropping here for the for the first time, and
Yep.
that's really what we're all about.
Yeah.
Brendan and I have loved each other for decades at this point. That makes us sound old. And we realized actually
Quarter of a century of love.
a couple years ago-ish that we were, a couple of things were happening. One is that we were, especially related to the pandemic and COVID, having unimaginably different experiences.
Yeah.
Social experiences and sort of bubble experiences and news experiences. We talked a lot about that in season one. And we just see we have different opinions about some pretty major ideological issues. And then it just seemed like, is it possible for us to model that? And it was. So this kind of just emerged out of us having these conversations. And then one day saying, I don't know, let's hit record. And maybe that's valuable. So I appreciate a second ago that you said, you offered maybe some tip for how to have these conversations, because that's what we believe in. Whatever you believe, we believe that we should be having real conversations about these things and not just sort of bouncing off each other based on one ideology or one I don't know, one point of divide, especially when we believe, and I think can prove in various ways, that we're fed a lot of division. We're
For sure.
encouraged to be divided in various ways.
Yeah. I mean, the algorithm definitely kicks stuff to you. I mean, there's social media, but this is also in terms of searches. This is also, if you have, I've got my kids just bought themselves an iPad this week. And I was just telling you, I immediately deleted the news feed. Because Apple News has a left bias thing. And I was like, why would you ever want your kid fed a biased anything when you know it's that? You're like, let's not do that. Also, my kids don't need to see news headlines constantly.
Unless it's the right bias.
Right, exactly. Unless it's proper and correct. But they don't need all that, right? But then, so that's so funny is that I think how manipulated we are being. I think it is. I think it's part of the plan of weaponizing our irritation and anger and discomfort and fear for probably just commercial purposes. But our antidote is democracy. And again, since we're talking about Israel Palestine, there, oh my goodness, are some people who have stopped talking, and you can see a very extreme version of what happens when people stop trying to understand each other or trying to, this is the thing I've been dreaming about this week, outdo one another in acts of love and grace. I just started thinking about that. I'm already procrastinating, but like, I was like, oh, wouldn't that have been so much better if that's what they started competing in, if they hated each other, if they were just like, oh yeah, show you how much we love you then. And we're going to love you so hard, you're going to be embarrassed. This is going to be embarrassing how loving we are to you. And they'll be like, oh, really? You spiteful infidel. Here's how much we love you. Check this out. And they just tried to like constantly outdo one another in acts of servanthood. And yes, obviously I'm a Christian, so this is like just boilerplate, like New Testament malarkey. But I got excited about it, just sort of imagining it. I allowed myself to just live in the fantasy land of like 5 minutes of like, oh, what would a war of outdoing one another in love, acts of love be like? It could still be aggressive and hateful, but it would be so much more beneficial. And if we could talk more, I think we could kind of arrive at that. It's just real easy to get mad enough and then you want to punch someone in the face or throw a rocket at them or rape them and cut their boobs off or whatever.
So we're going to launch a reality TV show called Love Wars, I think is where that's heading.
Yeah.
I was
going to win.
I was in a 4-day restorative justice training this week with my wife, which was really, really powerful just to sit in circle that long. And at one point, I think it was one of the trainers was saying this idea that to truly love, like there are forces working against love. So to truly love, we have to also fight. And that was intriguing to me. And then I think part of the confusion with love is in the idea of especially large scale conflicts and war, is part of the argument often seems to be, well, I'm doing this out of defense because I love my people. So this conflict of love, it's like, well, these people love their people so much they're going to fight for it. These people love their people so much they're going to fight for it. But I think what you're suggesting is, how do we expand that love to the other?
Yeah. How do you? Well, that's the big potent thing, right? We've heard it said that you should love your neighbor as yourself, but the call is to love your enemy. And listen, sometimes you can love your enemy by killing their neighbor. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it makes it much more complicated. But that's at least the goal that we're going for here. And one of the ways that I like to love, though, is hey, uh, anything that could be construed as a lie or false, let's get rid of it. Let's stop consuming poison. I say that literally as I sip the last sip of a cocktail. So I'm well aware of the sort of dichotomy of strangeness in my own life. But
Or
so let's clean the room.
let's discern the poisons we
Let's
ingest.
discern. Let's pick your poison, right? Let's choose. So it's originally going to start with like, okay, here's the thing I noticed immediately, Andy, when I started running into this was like, and I did this years ago, and I've sort of returned to it time and again, and I definitely in the last month have been super intense in it, like research mode, reading mode, interview, just consuming as much as I could to try to like make some sort of map of meaning. The thing that kept popping up to me, because this is how my brain works, is like, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense. So people like on October 8th or whatever, October 7th, even in the evening of October 7th, I sent you a bunch of the examples that we talked about sort of in the intro of people like celebrating on the 7th and like, this is what decolonization means. What did you think it meant? You know, nerds or whatever she called people, losers. It was like I don't know, some journalist. And I was like, well, wait a second, colonization. I was like, that doesn't really make any sense here. Like that's not a relevant concern. But it was like it's a super popular refrain. And so then I just was like, oh, let me just start compiling those. So, but instead of starting colonization, which was the first one I saw, I was like, let's start with genocide because I think we disagree on that one. So then to me, I put genocide like as something, especially this is reaching all the way back to like October 7th, that it was essentially saying like these people were responding to an ongoing genocide, like an ongoing genocide attempt. I think we have a slightly different framing now, a month later, that wherein we can consider it sort of anew. But to me, this constant refrain that I've literally seen every single day for whatever, a month and a half or a month, almost 2 months now, is that there's an ongoing genocide occurring. And essentially, no one should be turning a blind eye. And I don't think people should be turning a blind eye generally. Plenty of people, listen, I don't know what your life is. I don't know how full it is. You know how full it is. You know how much social media scrolling and Netflix streaming you're doing, which would suggest your life not being full. But I don't know how full your life is, but generally, we shouldn't be turning a blind eye to genocide. And if someone cites genocide, we should certainly pay attention. And so I started paying attention to that, and it especially early on, dug in, and I was like, "Oh, wait, is this true?" And as far as I could tell, like in terms of just information, I was like, "Okay, I can't validate this claim," but people haven't stopped saying it for 2 months. But then you and I talked about it, and you were like, "Oh yeah, I do think the genocide." Label is an appropriate one as to an inappropriate run. So here we go. We're picking up the first object in the room. Do we put this away? Do we throw it out of the room, or do we keep it on the table? What do you think, Andy?
Yeah, let's dive into that. I mean, the one hopefully brief piece of context here is that I traveled with my wife in a small group to the West Bank of Palestine and Israel about a year ago. Went pretty deep, actually interviewed a lot of folks there. I've launched a project called Unpacking Palestine to go through that footage. And it's just once again just a good example of how Brendan and I pour through, I don't know, issues and situations and massive amounts of content. I tend to be a bit more maybe if I have access, which is kind of a luxury in this situation,
Awesome.
more interpersonal. Like, oh, I'm going to hear these stories, which inevitably are all biased, right? I mean, that's just human nature, I think.
Yeah.
Like Brendan is going to do, I don't know, what did you say, 100 hours of research and looking at through many different lenses. One thing that comes up very consistently, and I think it's part of the issue here with the word genocide, is this semantic or language piece of what does the word even really mean? So and I think you've dug deeper into that than I have. And then if anybody has, the one fan out there who's listened to every episode knows I tend to be, lefty socialist kind of leaning activist, semi recovering like woke social justice warrior. And I don't know, how would you define your bias or your approach?
I don't know. How would you define it? You're defining yours pretty well. I was like, I agree with your own definition. You can define mine, and I'll just agree or disagree.
How do I define you? well, like I said, a prolific like researcher, like a ravenous consumer of like deep information, somebody who doesn't settle for headlines or high level like assumptions and reference points in journalism. You're like, show me the study, like show me the evidence,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's how you get to truth. And I really appreciate that about you. Um, and I don't know, I don't. You've helped me sort of recover from probably like a bit of an anti-Christian bias, and just oh whatever, it's just going to be all wrapped up in some Bible verse or some view of God, which I'm not even adverse to in my own spirituality at all. But I think I used to think that, oh, like if you try to look at like sort of tangible world issues through that lens, it's going to be distorted. And I don't. You've helped me sort of recover from that and be like, but that said, I don't know that you're the typical Christian that way, whatever that means. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't know either. I think I'd be the typical Christian, meaning a Christian. I probably wouldn't be the typical Christian of the person checking the box.
Yeah.
But I generally, as I've said on here, I think before, I think about 20, maybe 40% max of people who go to church every week and call themselves Christians would be Christians technically, which we might get into as relates to Muslims and Jews in this conflict too. So genocide. So as far as I could tell, I would, and the way I sort of filtered it, I'm kind of looking at my notes right quick, so that's why I'm sort of speaking it slowly. So I looked at genocide, and to me, especially on October 8th, the reasons I was like, hey, genocide doesn't make any sense as a the way it made sense was the UN definition of genocide basically says any attempt to harm, kill any group or state, even in whole or in part. So by the UN definition of genocide, I think it's indisputable that what's happening in Gaza is a genocide. I think, however, by that definition, it's indisputable that every conflict in the history of the world is a genocide, which makes genocide a really stupid. The UN is not the best run organization. They're not the most they're not a very reasonable organization. They do lots of weird things. So I think their definition sucks. Just because it starts to make genocide, it doesn't mean anything. But the thing is, genocide does mean something. Meaning, when you say it out loud, people have a very visceral response. But if genocide just means hurting any group of people in part, then that's all wars. Like us fighting the Germans was an attempt to genocide Germans. And you're like, well, that isn't how I thought about it. Right. That's how none of us think about it. So in some ways, I think UN definition is an improper semantic. But by the UN definition, it's inarguable that what's happening is a genocide. That to me is the strongest argument for people using that term as they have over the past 2 months.
And I think if you happen to have the exact language, that may be helpful, but I think what you're getting at is that it's broadly like the key thing there. I'm guessing is like the quantity of people that are affected. So it's like sort of a mass amount of people, and I don't know what that sort of cutoff is, or maybe it's relative to sort of the area. Whereas I think what you're getting at is that it would maybe more useful to have a definition of genocide that includes intention.
Yeah, to me, the intention would be like, we're trying to kill, like, this is how I just colloquially use it and how I think a lot of people respond to it. It's very similar to ethnic cleansing, right? Except the goal is not just like regional, but the goal is ultimate. You know what I mean? As with like the Turkish Armenian genocide, they literally like, we're trying to kill all the Armenians, all of them, or get rid of, or often even displace, right? We're trying to displace all of them. We saw this in Iraq, right? Or in Kuwait. They got rid of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. They were like, literally like, all Palestinians get out, get out of here. In which case you're like, okay, well, if there's also threat of death, that could kind of be genocide. To me, it has to be the targeting of a particular group, and this is the other thing, a definable group, and then the attempts, deliberate, systematic. It would help me to define it as such if someone said it out loud, right? If someone kind of stated the intention. We know Hitler stated his intention to genocide, kill every ding-dang Jew that he could get his hands on. Then it would help as well. So that to me is a better definition of like how we actually functionally as human beings use genocide in the word in English. Whereas
Yeah,
the
and there's
UN
a
definition is all war. All war is genocide. In which case you're like, oh, okay, well now genocide is not a useful term at all, because then it just means fighting. Which you're like, you're fighting these people, and it's like that point no one disagrees, and there's nothing specifically wrong with that. Whereas I would contend genocide enacted by human means alone, human adjudication alone, uh, is generally I would accuse it of it has to, if you're going to genocide a people group, the standard of evidence that you have to bring to bear to justify what you're doing has to be impeccable. It has to be unapproachable. I'm not saying it's impossible that it would. It's okay. It's whatever. I'm opening. I'm a liberal, right? In terms of politics and dealing with other people. So I have to be open to this, to the mind frame that genocide is sometimes okay. Somewhere, at least arguable. But to me, if you're going to engage in genocide, you better be like, it has to be the best evidence in the world. Like, it has to be beyond, it's like beyond of a shadow of a doubt type of thing. There must be no doubt in you that what you're doing is justified. And I think a lot of times the evidence really sucks when people do engage in genocides. And most, it seems convenient, and the arguments are lame, and they tend to kill or censor the people who disagree with them. So you can kind of tell how much their arguments suck.
And I want to offer something here, because it might sound like, you sort of picking apart the word genocide is to in some way invalidate the harm that's being done, or the I think you would use the word war. I think that's part of your argument, right? It's just like, why do we even need to call it a genocide? It's a war. War is hell. War is awful. What's happening is disgusting and horrific. And let's have that conversation.
I hate it. Yeah, I hate it.
Yeah,
I hate it. Yeah, but it's the same as if, like, oh, did that person was it a domestic abuse situation, or was it rape? And you're like, well, okay, and this is gross and terrible. Both of those are terrible. I hate both of those. No one should be doing either one of them. But like, is his penis end up inside you?
But let's be specific about the harm that was done, so we can actually
and you can't, right? If you're like, oh my god, because then it invalidates. No one believes you after that. After they show, if you're like, oh my gosh, he let's say this is terrible. This is just a disgusting example. He raped me every night, and you'd be like, I want to cut that person's penis off and put it in a formaldehyde jar and make him look at it every day. I'll just bring it in and show it to his face. That's how I want to respond to that guy. But then if we found out that actually what happened every night was like, maybe he squeezed your boob and it was sexual assault, and then he slapped you in the face a bunch of times, I don't want to necessarily cut that guy's penis off and put it in a formaldehyde jar and stick it in front of his face. I think he should be removed from you. And maybe I would like him to get slapped around or whatever for a while. And I certainly don't want him to slap you and touch your boobs anymore. He should be deprived of your person. He should not be near you. He should not be allowed to come near you, even with your permission. Honestly, I think you'd need a couple years to really psychologically figure out whether you're going to enable that. So like, but they're entirely different situations. And if you claim the false thing, the problem is once people figure out it's a false thing, then they're like, wait a second. Oh no. And this can happen just because trauma induces, like stress induces trauma responses, induces, I think, poverty of thinking sometimes. But at that point, if you think about that as a domestic abuse situation, once they figure it out, oh wait, he never raped you. Let's say you get an exam, you find out, oh, it's, I don't know how sexual exams work, but like they found out there's been no sexual contact with your body for a month. Then all of a sudden you're a liar, and then no one believes anything you say. And then this disgusting person in my fantasy scenario is allowed to keep grabbing your boobs and punching you in the face. Whereas I would not want that to happen anymore. So likewise with the genocide claim, you're like, can we validate it?
Well, and I think maybe this will branch into some related concepts. And you're like, no, we're going to validate or invalidate this one. To me, I've been struggling to call this a war, because war to me implies some level of balance of power. And I don't perceive an actual balance of power here whatsoever. And I think that's one lens we've looked through a number of different ways, right? It's like, okay, if we're just zoomed into like Israel and Palestine, which we consider the West Bank and Hamas, and I assume it will come up at some point in this conversation, like, well, what the hell is Palestine in the first place? That looks a certain way, and we know Israel is a very powerful military that's funded largely and supplied largely by our country, the United States. But then you zoom out and you're like, well, okay, so but coming back to genocide, there's no question that Jews have been the subject of horrible genocide for millennia.
Sure.
time and
Yeah.
time again. I mean, that's clear, because to your point, that the intention has always, well, not maybe not always, but it's demonstrably been there. Of course, the
Yeah.
Holocaust is the most egregious example, but there's plenty of others. The Jews have
Oh
been,
yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Yeah.
targeted and killed and forced out of numerous places. And so, my bias is pro-Palestinian, as I've stated a number of times, largely because I've met friends there and walked the land. I also have friends in Israel, so don't get me
Yeah.
wrong. But I see this imbalance of power where even the rockets from Hamas, which are the most powerful weapons the Palestinian has, typically the best example is in my experience, is so much more about the West Bank than Gaza. So I do want to make that clear. I don't
Yeah.
by no stretch an expert on what's happening in Gaza. I'm not even an expert on the West Bank. I don't know what that word even means, an expert, but that's where I've seen things with my own eyes.
Yeah.
One of the things I've seen is that, you drive around the West Bank and you see checkpoint after checkpoint of Israeli military, IDF, with automated weapons, and none of the Palestinians are armed, right? So you hear stories about children throwing rocks at military vehicles and then being shot, and I'm sure that's true to some extent. Now, to what extent exactly, it's hard to know,
Yeah. I
because
don't know
what we
either.
have are like scattered video clips and testimonies and
Yeah.
things like that.
I from a centrist point of view, I would 100% agree that has happened. To the degree of which is accurate, I have no idea.
Yeah.
But has that happened? I would say absolutely.
So there's this
Even,
imbalance of power if we just look at Israel and Palestine, but then if we zoom out, I think, first of all, I just believe Israel as a whole, the population of Israel is still suffering from at least decades, if not hundreds of years of trauma that has not been healed or addressed.
Sure.
And I see that trauma pouring out now into Gaza specifically, under the name of defense, and that's not entirely a false argument, in the sense that Hamas absolutely sends thousands of rockets into Israel. What I've seemed to piece together is that those rockets are not very sophisticated, they're not very powerful, they're not very accurate. Welcome your commentary there. So this imbalance of power, to me, is probably part of the reason I lean towards genocide and away from the word war. And I've been even using the word conflict, but then all of a sudden conflict just sounds like that's like two kids duking it out in the alley.
Yeah, it's too small. Yeah.
Not enough, so I don't know.
Yeah. Well, this is the great thing with genocide or anything, right? We can look at, you can just be like, okay, well, is genocide occurring? So by the UN definition, absolutely. I think by the colloquial definition, meaning like an intentional destruction of an entire group of people, genocide remains impossible to demonstrate. But first, let's look at war, for example, right? So what I always semi-jokingly refer to as the Woktionary, the Merriam-Webster dictionary, they are just the least semantically conservative popular dictionary. They rapidly update, I think, much faster than every other dictionary in common use. Like, oh, okay, this is how it's being used now, even if it's like been using that way for 2 years or 4 years or something like that. I think they're a little ADHD personally, so I think it's sort of funny. But like, war is defined by Merriam-Webster as the state of usually open and declared armed hostile conflict between states or nations. Now, open and declared armed hostile conflict, Palestine's doing that, Israel's doing that. States or nations, you get into a gray area, because is Palestine a state? Is Palestine a nation at all? Right. That's where you go. I don't know. I mean, in Gaza, this is a great thing. In West Bank, it's funny. If we were talking about the West Bank, I would, and this is why you have to, if you're saying Palestine, well, actually, if you're saying Palestine, we got to get into that too. It's extremely confusing already. The West Bank, I think, is a completely different situation than Gaza. The problem with Gaza not being very much like the West Bank at all is that it's sort of the sad thing. It's kind of like, I think it proves a lot of Israel's claims, even though I have the suspicion that they sort of created a scenario where it would validate their claims, that it's like, well, if we treated the West Bank like we treated Gaza, where we just got out and let them be whatever, it's your business. You stay over there, but you were self-governing. And then this is what happens. So they're like, well, we can't do that in West Bank then, because look what happened here. Like, why would we keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. That's the screenwriter's definition of insanity. But the number 2 definition of war is a state of hostility, conflict, or antagonism, or a struggle or competition between opposing forces or to a particular end. So as long as there's any force involved,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? If you're a guy in a wheelchair, because I'm just thinking of this, my old neighborhood in LA, like I once saw this big lady fighting a dude in a wheelchair, like punching each other and stuff. And I was like, oh, like, well, they both have force. At that point, I don't even know who to intervene with, because it is a man fighting a woman, so that puts you in a place. But then it's a really big woman fighting a dude in a wheelchair. So I'm like, I mean, it's one of those things where I was like, I don't know who to grab.
Oh my God.
I was like, think about it like in all the intersectional ways, right? You're like, I don't know. The power dynamic is so complex here. So yes, I would absolutely say it's an unequal.
But by both those definitions, this falls into war, because those definitions don't remotely get into the sort of, and that's a hard line to draw. Like, at what point does it become such an imbalance of power that it's no longer a war? I mean,
yeah. I think as long as people are still fighting, then it's a fight. So if you're shooting any rock, if you have the ability to shoot any rockets or shoot anybody with a gun, then you have force. Actually, listen, if you could throw a rock, I mean, you're still kind of in the game, but you do have to ask it, right? It's the same thing. It's like, oh, well, we got into a fist fight. You're like, oh gosh, God, what a hard weekend. Why'd you get in a fist fight? Well, this kid on the playground. Be like, wait a second. You're 34 years old. What do you mean some kid on the playground? How old was this kid? Like, at what point was that a fist fight? At what point was that you just like going over and punching a little kid in the head? So that's I understand that in terms of like, is this a conflict of that sort? I think the problem is with Palestine, you have, at least in Gaza, you have like the ruling class, which is essentially represents the state. So you have Palestine as a state, the same way as if our military declared war somewhere else, the United States would be at war with those people. So the Palestinians have been like, we want to fight you. Like we have declared war, and our whole goal is to have war against you.
So I think that's yeah. I think I'm about to attempt to oversimplify this, probably to the point of being insulting. But so coming back to genocide, right? And so maybe just that we could ask a simpler question in this moment of who has the intention to destroy the other population? Is that explicit? We know Hamas has declared that they intend to wipe out Jews. There's various ways that shows up, and chants from the river to the sea. And
the Hadith, where they say they'll do it to kill all. Wait, I'm gonna read it. It's just so funny. It's disgusting, but okay. So it says Hamas aspires to implement Allah's promise. This is in their it's in their charter, Hamas's charter, which is the ruling party of Palestine. So consider this like a version of the Constitution of the United States of America. The prophet, prayer and peace be upon him, said, "The hour of judgment, the day or hour of judgment will not come until Muslims will fight the Jews and kill them, until the Jews hide behind rocks and trees, which will cry, 'O Muslim, O Abdallah, slave of Allah, there is a Jew behind me. Come on and kill him.'" So the rocks and the trees will be helping in this intention. I just want to say, I think people don't talk about that enough. I was like, hold on a second. We need to know what we're talking about here. This is like Lord of the Rings, Ents, and hobbits type of stuff, right? And then check this out. I just want to apply this to the one tree so no one condemns this tree improperly. This will not apply to the Garkad tree, which is a Jewish tree. So I didn't want anyone to think that there would be no trees or rocks left on the Jews' sides, according to the Palestinian ruling authority. So at least one tree will not yet yell out, "Hey, there's a Jew behind me." That tree will be like, "Hey, Jew, stay behind me. I'm not going to say anything."
I had not heard that.
It's amazing.
So I think some of the things, again, my information, hello, is a little more anecdotal. Talking to people who've been working there for 25 years. That Hamas, there was an election, I want to say somewhere around 15 years ago.
A long time, yeah.
Where it's been a long time, right? I mean, in terms of politics, that's an eternity. Yeah. And where Hamas won this election, but then wasn't really given any real power or wasn't allowed to rule in any meaningful way. So I'm a little fuzzy, and I just need to do some more homework. I don't know if we need to unpack it here about just, well, what happened between then and now. But one thing we know what's happened is, as you said, Israel withdrew from Gaza, but then blockaded it. And it's not just Israel, Egypt blockading
Yeah.
Gaza on the southern border.
Yeah.
I'm sure the U.S. is being involved in the sea blockade. And so you've got this, it seems totally understandable to me that if I might be giving Hamas too much credit, but I believe, and based on what I've heard, that there, whatever that party was when it was elected more than a decade ago, um, I think was what we might consider more of a democratic party, more, uh, in service of the people. And what we see now is the result of it being basically starved. Um, and I mean, again, anecdotally, just hearing recently that, like, well, there was a lot of funding pouring into Hamas from other nations,
Yeah.
and it all got channeled into, military infrastructure and tunnels, and so there's
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
huge question I'm holding about, well, what is the relationship even between Hamas and the Palestinian people? And you've also got the Palestinian Authority based out of Ramallah in the West.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And the story I've heard about why Palestine isn't a nation is, um, I mean, a few things have happened over time, right? Like, Israel has clearly encroached even beyond the green line that was drawn in 1948 or 1947, and continues to with the settlements, particularly in the West Bank.
Yeah.
Um, but the main thing I heard was that I've heard, we've actually interviewed many leaders, including the next mayor of Bethlehem,
Yeah.
say, look, every one of them is like, we want peace, we want a two-state solution. But one of the things that I've heard is that they want the capital, they want Jerusalem back, basically.
Mm.
So much of this seems to be about the fight for Jerusalem.
Yeah. That
And
wouldn't be back. The funny thing is that wouldn't be back, right? I mean, it literally is Jerusalem. So it's not, that wouldn't be Palestinian. That's the fascinating thing, right? So like this is why we've talked about this. This is I mean, people like, oh my gosh, they try to solve it, think they can solve it, and it's intractable. I just want to loop that back to our thing. Can Palestine be free? And I was like, as you talk, the more you talk about it, you're like, I don't think so, man. I mean, it's cool to chant, but it's like, I don't know. I mean, because that's the fascinating thing, right? To say they want Jerusalem back. I was like, who wants Jerusalem back? I mean, Jerusalem, thanks or no thanks to this being a semi-Christian nation, Christmas is coming up, right? We're about to celebrate the birth of a God made incarnate. Hail incarnate deity born, right? The Christmas carols come up.
who
And
was
that
born in what we now call
yeah,
the West Bank, by the way.
right, exactly, right. So then you're like, wait a second, who are they and how did they end up with it? You're like, that's real confusing. And then how would they get it back? Because it wasn't theirs first. Like, this is the crazy thing, right? So like, how would they get Jerusalem back? You're like, well, what do you mean? Like, Palestine didn't exist until modern Israel existed. Like, there was no Palestine, meaning like a Palestinian state. They were both formed at the exact same moment. So there was kind of like warring twins. This to me is like, this is Old Testament, right? This is Jacob and Esau fighting, I guess, essentially. And of course, I'm sure some scholars would be like, it is exactly that. These are the descendants of blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? But it seems also that most of the descendants are Arab. A lot of people are fighting. A lot of people would be like Arab Palestine is kind of how a lot of people refer to it. And if it's Arab, then you have to argue when those people came in at all. So then it's certainly, you couldn't say it's giving back. That would literally be like if the Lakota took over an area now, and then they would be like, okay, you've got to give it back to the colonizers now. You've got to give it back to the settlers. So that's best. Just like in terms of if I was talking to that mayor of Bethlehem.
I lost your audio.
You were talking to the mayor of Bethlehem or whatever. That would be that would be the question. I'd be like, what did she say then when you said, what do you mean give it back if you're talking about Jerusalem? Like it's it sounds like Jerusalem. As far as I know Jerusalem as like a Jewish, the center of the Jewish religion, which we know, especially if you're talking from any sort of Muslim context, we know you were later. Like Muhammad didn't come around until whatever, like 1,000 years after Christ even. And he was an upstart against the Jewish religion. So Jerusalem has been the center of that region for Jewish life 1500 BC, I think it is. Yeah, like 1500 BC. So then it wasn't yours. So what you're talking about is trying to take back something that was not yours. So then that's crazy. That's a crazy thing for that lady to say. But what did she say to that?
The mayor.
Yeah.
Well, it was a man, Maher Kanawati.
Oh, sorry.
We didn't dig deeper in
Yeah.
that particular interview, but
Oh, okay.
I am hoping I could actually find a way to get him on again. We've been going back and actually trying to reconnect with some of the folks that we interviewed a year ago.
Oh my gosh, it must be very different. I'm assuming it's different now. It sounds worse in the West Bank, by the way. And the same thing is all the conversation we're going to have today. I just want to say this out loud. When you talk to people about Israel Palestine, I think discussing the West Bank and Gaza are two phenomenally different situations.
And I agree with that.
Yeah,
right
occupation you can't apply to Gaza. I don't think at all. Genocide you can't apply. But occupation you can apply. You can even apply. I think you can't apply apartheid to Gaza. You can apply apartheid to West Bank. You can apply colonization. You could even start getting to potentially colonization sort of thing. Although it's really just colonization has nothing to do with this whole thing, just because like this is a continually colonized region. So it's weird to complain. Like it seems fake because there's too many Muslims there. You know what I'm saying? And if you became Muslim because you were colonized, then you obviously don't care about colonization. You like it. So just roll over and accept the colonization that you love. That's if you're a Muslim, you already admitted that you accepted the colonization of Muslims in that area and you became Muslim. So you like being colonized essentially. So just go ahead and keep like being colonized. Like, I don't know, but then it gets into areas of consent, right? You're like, just because I promised to have sex with you once doesn't mean I'll have sex with you every time kind of thing, you know? So I know I'm pushing past there, but like, I do want to say that out loud. Like, I think a lot of, and this is part of the problem. And I say this too, because I think it's a lot of problem. People talking about Palestine in general, West Bank, Gaza, and they're all very different scenarios, but I think they co-inform one another. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, maybe it would have been wise to separate these episodes into Gaza.
Yeah, but it is all Palestine. So it's, I mean, everything you say about the West Bank is totally legit.
And everybody I talked to in the West Bank, including quite recently, feels solidarity with Gaza.
Yeah.
So there's a, even if there's not a quote unquote nation, there's a sense of, let's say, nationality between them
or something. Yeah, yeah.
And you're getting at something, you know, we got to the point of literally drawing this out in a timeline, which maybe we should make the Murrow board public. I think it was quite useful because it is easy to get stuck in the last 75-year sort of timeline of this.
Yeah.
That's one thing we thought was really useful. Like anything, it's like, what lens are you putting this through? And so if you're just looking at a 75-year lens, this story looks a very specific way. If you stretch out that lens a few hundred more years, it's another way. If you stretch it out a couple thousand years, it's another way. One of the things I thought was fascinating, so we mostly most of my time was in the West Bank.
Yeah.
Then we drove back through Israel because we went through the northern crossing back to Amman, Jordan, to fly back. And so I saw some decent amount of Israel, but we spent a day in Jerusalem. And one of the things I thought was so fascinating was the old city, which is broken into these 4 quarters. So you've got Christian, Jewish, Islamic, and the Armenian quarter. So you've got in Jerusalem, I think to your point, you've got these, you know, 3 major religions and four ethnic groups like represented, living together.
Yeah.
In harmony, maybe not. We also went to Haifa in the northwest part of Israel. And the story I heard there is that's kind of still an example of what people I talked to say was happening pre-World War II in the Ottoman Empire, where Jews and Muslims were living together in some relative harmony.
That makes sense. That's why I think a one-state solution is really more tenable than a 2-state solution. So then, as long as Muslims are ruling everything, then everyone can kind of get along. So then either all Muslims or all Jews should rule everything, if that was a good time. Because I've heard the same thing, anecdotally, that they're like the conflicts in the region were minimal. But that's because they were fully and 100% colonized by the Ottoman Empire. And they submitted to that colonial rule. So I was like, that seems to work. I mean, in terms of history, that worked. Just letting the colonizer colonize you really seem to work. And it sounds like anecdotally as well. They are super fan. They're literal on the ground fans of, yes, when the Ottoman Empire colonized us, when Muslims ruled us, everything was at peace. And that is, I think that plays out not in the modern sense, but in the ancient sense. The Ottoman Empire didn't necessarily try to kill all the Jews there. They were they taxed Muslims and non-Muslims differently. So there was a capitalist desire to keep people from converting, because if they converted, they wouldn't owe the same taxes. So you want people in your region who aren't Muslims because you get more money out of them. And also, there's enough in, like, listen, Islam is a very like militaristic religion. It was literally founded by a military leader, so it's militaristic. Makes sense. And it's logical. It would be almost, I often look at Islam that like if like King David created that was like the true figurehead of like Judaism or something, right? Because he was like a military leader. So it's like it's a militaristic thing. So then it is aggressive. It's more aggressive in terms of socioculturally than a lot of other sort of establishments of colonial might. However, there's a ton it's based on, it's post Christianity. So the Muslim quarter, for example, would be either the Muslim or the Armenians would be the latest arrivals to that quadrant of four people, right? Obviously, the Christians are later than the Jews. The Jewish quarter is going to be the oldest. Those are the people with who would you do we've talked about this, the land acknowledgement. If you did the land acknowledgement, Canaanites, as far as we can tell, and Philistines, at least according to like Encyclopedia Britannica and historical sources, kind of aren't a people group anymore. We don't know genetically how that plays into who's in that region now. A lot of contentions with people who've come to that region now are actually Arabs who come from other areas. So they're as far as we know, like the Jewish people as a unit have the land rights claim to this area, if land rights are such a thing. I don't necessarily believe they are, as we know, but they have that, or whatever. My gosh, this situation is hilariously complicated, isn't it?
Well,
I mean, it's not that complicated, but it's still complicated enough that like this is fascinating, right? We just don't, and this is cool though. We don't hear, this is another thing you can stop if you're talking to people about this and go, hey, how amazing is this? We have such a strong decolonization narrative in our culture, but in their culture, they long for the colonial days. They long for the days they were colonized by the Ottoman Empire, who came from outside and then just took this whole area over, and then they ruled over it. The Romans ruled over this area. We looked on that timeline, right? I'm gonna use my fingers for whenever I put these videos up. So the timeline of Palestine that we know from like archaeological record is as wide as our screen, say, right? It's like that big. And what we're talking about was just Israel and Palestine as like modern nations in the sort of like 47 and on sort of thing, is like the entire conflict from then to now is as big as like my finger is slightly spread enough to like hold like a single thick slice of cheese. So it's very weird. And I think anyone who pretends like this just really started then is lying to you. That's another good thing. If anyone says, oh, well, this really problem already started in 1947. Well, this problem really started in 67 when yeah, they're lying to you. This is at least a 3,000-year-old conflict to some degree. I would say it was obviously sharpened in certain areas or whatever. And this region has been under colonial control for, at least we know from the record, from like the that you could say that when King David, who knows, the Philistines can make the claim that in 1000 BC, when Israel conquered the land, that was a colonial imposition. I think that's completely, we're putting a modern lens on an ancient concept. But the Persian Empire colonized it for 400 years. The Persian-Roman wars meant back and forth for another 500 years. Multiple kingdoms for 400 years. The Crusaders basically ran it for 100 years, which I never knew until I did this research. I thought that was fascinating. I never knew the Crusaders had that much of a victory. Then Muslim control, either Ottoman or multiple other empires from 1187 AD till about 1920 AD. British control was like barely there, which I think is hilarious. It's another thing. I've seen this online. A lot of people make the argument that somehow the UK is to blame, or like, I think that's based on a super myopic present day, like England equals bad, white people equals bad, European equals bad, which is like, it doesn't have anything to do with anything in this region, really.
Well, that's something that's
yeah,
coming up to me right now is the centering of the British intervention. as like the whole story, which
It's like
in
it's
itself,
barely there. Yeah.
well, and any, reasonably astute, woke scholar would tell you that centering is bad. Like centering white people is bad.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's like when you look at this timeline, it's like that's all we talk about is centering, and it was bad in my opinion. Like it was arbitrary and kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
But my God, it's not the whole story. Yeah.
No, and that's just normal for this era. This is the crazy thing: is can Palestine be free? If you look at its history, I would say no. It absolutely. So that's why I just say in general to that answer that question, it can't be free. So Palestine must be free. What are you, again? I haven't talked to enough people who are out chanting Palestine must be free. What are you talking about? Like, so you're asking for something that's pretty much never existed in the way that you're talking about it throughout all of human history, but you're saying now it will take place. And you're like, well, how? Because they're not free now. Even when Israel left, they still weren't free. If Israel was wiped off the face of the map, I can tell you they're probably not going to be free, even just in the way that you mean. Because if we look at the history, that's thousands and thousands of years of not being free under multiple. And so, like, them, I honestly, let's say if trauma's passed down or if things are passed down from generation to generation, then generationally, I don't even think the people who live in that region, Israel amongst them, you have to include, I don't even know that they know how to be free. I don't. I don't know if they would function well under it. That's like literally if you had tigers in cages for generations and then you brought them into the wild, they would die. They would be mauled and killed, and they would just be food very quickly. But this is why when animals, you know what I'm saying? And I think human
And
beings are the same. If you put an urban if you put me in the middle of the flipping wilderness, I lasted about 40 days. I wouldn't last much longer than that. I'm not acculturated.
yeah,
I
it,
so
there's something to that. Like I'm talking to my friend who brought me there, has been working there for 25 years, and with tons of compassion, we're talking about, how do we do any, kind of healing and real trauma work. You've got people
yeah,
who, I mean, the West Bank is shut down for weeks now, almost 2 months.
yeah,
No work. I mean, a lot of it's based on tourism. Obviously, there's no tourism happening.
yeah.
Israel is still there doing what they have been doing, for decades, and in terms of encroaching and building settlements
It sounds like it's getting worse in terms of
it
like
is.
there are Jewish militias like seeking to take advantage of this time and
Yeah,
raising
yeah,
neighborhoods and kicking people out of their home. Like it's
yeah.
I fully, again, I'm not like I stand with Israel or I stand with Palestine person, but I think that's anyone who's claiming that sort of stuff isn't going on, that Israelis or Jewish people aren't victimizing people, especially specifically in the West Bank, um, and taking advantage of the situation to do so now, would be lying to you.
And but then beyond that, what beyond what I was just saying is talking about job creation.
Yeah.
And the unfortunate reality, I think, more or less matches what you were just describing, which is they're not prepared for sort of to enter the world economy as it is, and they're
No.
not necessarily skilled up in jobs that are the rest of the world is going to pay for and find meaningful. So it's a real challenge.
Yeah.
Like what does that even mean, and how do they, function, and that's just purely through an economic lens. Obviously, they're human beings that we need to be compassionate, for all human beings. One thing you touched on, which I want to address in some light, some short way, I guess, brief way,
Yeah.
is what we I think in these dialogues have come to refer to as sort of the woke movements, um, totally latching on to the point of being pro-Palestine. It's really weird for me, as I mentioned, being sort of in recovery from I argue now oversimplified woke viewpoint on a lot of issues, and that's part of the attraction, I think, is just
Sure. Yes.
look,
Oh, absolutely.
the ego is attracted to any simplification because my God, all of this shit is too complex and
And it is. It's really
emotionally
complicated. Yeah.
devastating, and it's just like I don't want to think about it. I don't want to feel all this shit. There's a simpler answer somewhere. I'm not saying
Yeah.
it's all wrong either. Like, but one of the weird parts of my journey in this is, being in the West Bank, meeting people, doing some work there, walking the land, feeling it. As I mentioned, I'm not afraid to say developing a pro-Palestinian bias in that way.
Sure.
Um, at the same time, being kind of astonished at how let's just we need a term for it. So like let's just keep calling it the woke movement has so latched on to that. I think looking through the rather myopic 75-year lens of who's the underdog here. And so I have a lot of cognitive dissonance because on the one hand I'm like, fuck yeah. And I went to a march, a week after the war started, the conflict started. And so there's that part of me that's like, yeah, hell yeah, like finally somebody's like, paying attention. And on the other hand, kind of questioning, and maybe this is my own ego being like, hey, wait a minute, I'm the one who's been there, and I want to, I don't know about what I know or whatever, or frankly,
I've been helping, I'm helpful,
or being frankly some guilt that I've been sitting on all this footage for a year or whatever.
Oh yeah.
Same time feeling like, whoa, like can we pump the brakes here a little bit, because I'm not really convinced that a lot of the people in those marches are doing the kind of discussion or research we're doing. I don't know that they actually understand a lot of what is happening here. To your point, when they're out chanting about anti-colonization, and it's like, well, what does that even mean in this context?
Yeah, which one? I don't even know. I just don't know.
And some of it downright, I'd like to think it's the absolute minority, but I really don't know. Some of it downright becoming pro-Hamas, anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic.
Yes.
And it's like, well, no, that's not the answer. Like that's not gonna help. That's not what I mean when I say pro-Palestinian.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think, and this is the thing that I feel like everyone should, and this is, I know sometimes it's another version of exception, like, oh, having to put a parenthetical before everything you say. And that can kind of, I feel like that's a thing we've worked through as a culture for the last couple of years. And I feel like we need to move farther away from it than we are. However, the desire for people to live as the best versions of themselves, this is like the call of love, should exist for all people, regardless of what nation they are. I feel the same way for anybody who's in Hamas. Like, if someone who is in Hamas, who is like part of the ruling, who's a Palestinian, who's a Palestine, a part of the, listen, Hamas is the Palestine's army. So it's just a Palestinian, right? So a Palestine armed forces member, if they get shot in the head while they're fighting someone, I'm not super sad about it, just because I was like, okay, well, that's, you live by the sword, die by the sword kind of thing. However, my distinct and specific desire is even for whatever, we've heard enough of the anecdotes. I think one of the worst was the guy, trigger warning, I suppose, the guy who said it was a first person anecdote related to a Hamas person who had invaded on October 7th, was raping a woman, and then cut her breast off and thrown it on the ground, and people were like playing with it, and then he was having sex with her, and he shot her in the back of the head, and then killed her, and then finished having sex with her, ejaculated inside a dead body. So like that guy, if that guy dies, I'm not like super sad about it, and I know that's not fully Christ-like of me, but I'm just like, I was like, I don't know what else to do. Like there's no, like, in the frame of restorative justice, there's really no, you've absented us from having any restoration here. The only healing, but my hope is for that person, even that man who is he's terrible. I think that person should die. However, I want him to be redeemed. Like I want him to die like having wept and recognized his awfulness, or I would just use the word sin, like the depth of his sin, having gotten I want him to have the opportunity to apologize to the woman's family. I want him to get to apologize and to be forgiven by that woman's family. Like I want radical forgiveness everywhere, because I want all people to be righteous, And I think this is the thing you're talking about too, where people are like, just kill them all, kill all the colonizers, the South African thing, kill the Boer, right? People just sing that because they're like, yes, end it. And I get it. We all fall into that narrative, right? And I think in general, we love underdogs. And then I think even more so in this sort of intersectional, like oppressor-oppressed lens, it tends even stronger to that, where you're just like, but then that's the same problem with Israel too, where they're just like, let's kill you know what? We're done. We're done. We're killing we're killing everybody. We're just anywhere you are, we're killing. If anyone else is there, I don't care. We're going to kill you. If you hide in a hospital, we're bombing the hospital. You hide in a school, we're bombing the school. I mean, it makes pragmatic sense, but I also think it's morally pretty freaking crazy. I don't like that at all.
So that brings us back to Gaza and back to genocide, which is, I think part of the argument there is you've got a population of 2 million people, last I've heard, and granted, because I'm so immersed in sort of my own project around these interviews, I'm
Yeah.
not totally keeping up with all the news. But the last I think I heard was about 1.5 million of those people have been displaced. Something
Yeah.
probably north of 40% of the infrastructure and housing has been destroyed.
Yeah.
So there's like the direct killing of people, which obviously is happening, and the numbers
Absolutely.
at this point are 10x more of the October 7th attack on Israel.
Yeah.
Um, and it's weird to even compare those. I don't know. I'm not sure how useful it is to compare those numbers. I mean, I think the argument is like, well, now what Israel is doing is more horrific than what was done on October 7th. And I'm like,
Yeah. I don't.
yeah, like maybe I don't know where that argument goes. I'm like, yes,
I don't know either. Yeah.
hold that bias personally, and I'm like, sure, that yeah,
Yeah.
like but at the same time, it's like it just feels like that's going to lead us to more, tit for tat back and forth. I mean, this
Yeah.
is the whole problem here.
Yeah.
But the other reason I think the word genocide is used, maybe across the West Bank and Gaza, but right now specifically for Gaza, is this displacement reduces the likelihood of survival for more than a million people.
Yeah.
And so it's
Well,
the
yeah,
direct killing,
yeah.
but then there's also just like
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
else is going to die as a result
Well,
of it.
in this specific case, that's the tricky thing, right? It increases their risk of survival. It increases their likelihood of survival because it gets them out of a war zone where they're way more certain to die. But then it puts them in a scenario for long-term survival becomes terrible. And then really Israel is creating the scenario by which they would be likely to die in that. You know what I mean? So it's a weird thing, like getting them out of it. But at this point, the displacement numbers have exceeded that of the 1948, the Nabka or whatever. Which again, I see both sides of Nabka. Getting rid of everyone who could have possibly been or was in leagues with the people who tried to kill you, like nationally, makes perfect sense. But it also seems a lot like Japanese internments to me, where you're like, I think you're going after non-combatants now and making them leave. And I don't, who have, and some of whom have displayed no allegiance to the people who are trying to kill you. So I think that's a shame. I think the Japanese internments are one of the great civil rights shames upon our country or whatever. So I would consider the Nabka very similar, where I was like, Israel is not a hero in this. Palestine's not a hero either. I mean, in terms of
Nakba, by the way.
Nakba, sorry. I always flip the B and the K. But yeah, have been displaced. Now that's normal in war. My whole thing is genocide the thing is why it's very hard for me to believe genocide is that it's been brought up since previous to October 7th, is that they were that was been the claim. And the people making the claim are still making the claim now. And I already don't believe them. I'm already, you're not true. And we looked at this, right? That Gaza's population has increased by 5 million since 1947. So one could say, they're gathering them together over what would that be? An 80-year plan? Like, this is better than Hitler. They gathered them together, and then now this is what they've been planning for the whole time. Basically, this is an 80-year plan to increase their population by 5 million and then kill them all. So this is like but to me, this feels a little bit like that wasn't a genocide, but it is now. Now you can see they're enacting the genocide. So I was like, that's where I'm like, all right, that's dubious, but I can understand the argument. The growth rate in Israel is less than the growth rate in Gaza in terms of just like people having more children or whatever. And so no genocide in history, as far as I know, has resulted in increased population of the target of genocide. So it seems to contradict the entire operation. And the Palestinian population, I think, the 5 million increase in Gaza anyway, I think is like a tripling of the population. So throughout a 80-year genocide, the population of the target of the genocide has increased 3 times. Like that seems, I was like, I don't know what you're talking, like why you would bring genocide up, unless the claim is, like I said, that now this was the final act of the genocide and everything before now has actually been compilation. That wasn't the argument made previous to now. So then I'm like, you just changed your argument. And so I don't really believe you. But previous to now, it seems to contradict everything that we would think about what a genocide is. Just because every other genocide in history ends up with less people because you're killing them.
So that I think we could agree on.
Yeah.
If we're going to talk about genocide, it's about reducing populations.
Yeah.
Whatever other characteristics we apply. So I don't know. This is you're, I think, the first one who's brought that to my attention. So I want to learn more about the population increases or decreases or shifts. I think there may be something about, well, who there's just, if there was an increase, there's the number of people, but then I'm also curious about sort of who it was.
Yeah, who is added to the population? Yeah.
Yeah, so I can't speak to that. But one thing I'm curious about, that's come up in a lot of my interviews with Palestinians is,
yeah,
and I'm quite certain, and I actually want to interview more people in Israel as well. But I'm fairly certain, and I've heard this somewhat on both sides, again anecdotally, but it's really curious to me. Each side seems to say that it's the other side who won't accept the peace or the two-state agreements or the Oslo Accords or whatnot. I mean, that's very so many clips from my interviews of Palestinians in the West Bank saying that.
Yeah.
One of them was, it was sad actually. I mean, he was talking about how excited he was much younger. He was a kid when the Oslo Accords happened, and he was like, we were celebrating and all this stuff. And then a week later, it all fell apart.
Yeah.
I can't seem to find any reasonable explanation of like whose fault it really is that that these two-state solutions that have been proposed multiple times in the last 75 years have fallen apart. So I'm just holding that curiosity.
Yeah, I don't know either. As far as I can tell, it's a lot of both. That you could accuse both sides of sabotaging peace attempts multiple times. And this is why I think a lot of people point back to like the League of Nations became the United Nations, and then one of their, honestly, pretty early in their existence as under the rebrand, their attempt was to like divide this region up, which has basically just been divided and handed over constantly throughout history. And the whole region we're even talking about, the two places that are Palestine now, were not Palestine in that division. It was like Egypt and Jordan, I think, or Syria and Jordan own those places, like had those places. So it wasn't even really Palestine. So this is fast. Like the biggest difficulty here is I think we have a cool corollary a little bit in our own culture. Is you're like, well, okay, what would you do in like North Dakota, right? If like all native peoples were like, we want this area back, and then like all the like Euro settlers who've been here now for generations upon generations upon generations wanted like a couple little parts in there. And then who even starts it? I don't know. But there are skirmishes, and some states outside of, wait, what did I pick? North Dakota. Some states outside of North Dakota come in and try to attack and like support the white people. Let's make it white and indigenous, right? So the indigenous people get to take over all of North Dakota because it was theirs originally, right? Because that's what happens, this sort of area. They're like, well, Israel has the best claim to the land. Jewish people, and Israel really, even as a nation, has been there longer than anybody, so they get it, or they got the majority of it. But then I don't think they were, the way that Israel pretends that it happened, which really you can then blame Palestine for everything, was the United Nations divided it up, right, and gave Israel like 57% or something. And previously, they didn't really have that much control of it, so they were kind of given a pretty substantial control, and it was the majority. And then quote unquote Palestine, who I don't flip it know. They didn't define them at the time. I still don't even know who a Palestinian really is, because an Arab, like indigenous, like less indigenous than Jewish people, but like having been in that land for a long time, Arab people also live in Israel, so they're Israelis too, and then Muslims are Israelis, although less so. I think it's largely a religious distinction, really, more than it is an ethnic one, as near as I can tell, because they're all of the region. So I think Israel was messing with the people who weren't Israel at that time more than they say they were, because then multiple nations attacked Israel after that. And like, what was it, like 1 year later, less than 1 year later? And then Israel defended themselves and won. And that's when they took control of areas that are now Palestine, from Syria, Jordan, Egypt, anybody else who would have a claim. So they got attacked and won. And really from then on, they kind of have conqueror's rights, as far as I can understand, for that culture, not trying to colonize it with my own Western thinking. So then they have conquerors' rights to do whatever they want to anyone, like just like the Ottoman Empire did. And if people wanted peace, like during the Ottoman Empire, they should have just submitted and said, yes, Israel, rule us. I don't think Israel fully wanted that either. So I think they shirked their duties. They should have just gone, they should have obliterated ruling everyone in the region and just taken it over and then governed it responsibly, maybe like the Ottoman Empire did. They should have one stated solution at then. I
mean,
think
that seemed to work for what, 400 years or something.
Yeah, at least and really off and on for like thousands. I mean, that's pretty much how the region runs. So now, did Israel do that because they're so loving and kind and they really wanted people to have their own right of self-determination? That's probably what they would say. I'm at least skeptical of that. I'm not saying that isn't the case. So as near as I can tell, in the recent sort of style, I would put the blame heavier on Muslim nations. However, if you look at Israel on the big map, when you zoom out and they're surrounded by Muslim nations, it's not like anyone's trying to kill the Jews, because they could have killed the Jews quite a long time ago. Although they did try in the 60s to pretty much kill it, and they lost. They lost the fight, in which case, all right, tough luck, you lose. Like losers, what is it? Losers walk, right? So since then, I think ultimately my understanding of this now is Israel has been crummy colonizers because they haven't fully committed to it. They should just do it. I'm not anti-colonial. Neither are the people of Palestine. It would be, unless they're finally like, no, now we're done with it. I don't believe it. I just don't. I consider it. I'd have to be convinced of it. But they've done a crummy job of being colonizers, and that they're sucky rulers, and they treat quite a few people like trash, based on even their apprehensions of ethnic, or I wouldn't even say ethnic, or maybe religious first and foremost, but second, like nationalist adherence. Like,
I think there's certainly some what I sometimes call generational amnesia. That's my best explanation of why Palestinians identify with that identity or that nationality. Because, but like, it doesn't, when you actually stretch out the timeline to the point you've made a few times, it doesn't actually make a lot of sense as an outsider. Like, what do you mean? I talk to Palestinians. There's absolutely a sense of identity there. It's unquestionable.
Yeah. But this is the fun thing. This is the thing. This is why I don't like anecdote as much. But this is why I need people like you in my life to remind you. And Archie did before I did this episode. She was like, remember, you're talking about people here. I was like, yeah, you're right. Thank you. I need those people in my life. But people can be wrong about themselves and their own culture. I mean, just like saying, like, I am a Palestinian. You'd be like, well, actually, you're not. You know what I mean? Like, we could literally be like, because if you look over there in Israel, there's a person who, if we did and again, this is the great thing with genetic typing. We did your genetic typing. You guys be completely compatible. Maybe you're literally related. Maybe your cousin's over there and he's an Israeli. How is he different than you? Because it pledges allegiance to a flag. So then really what we're talking about is kind of what we already have in our country. And you sent me an article this morning with like this like virulently partisan, Democrat or whatever. And I was like, that's kind of really all this is. This is like a nationalistic, this is like a choosing to identify as blank situation. And so an Arab person of this region is over there in Israel being like, I love you, Israel. And an Arab person who's over in the West Bank is like, no, I'm a Palestinian. This person's like, I'm an Israeli. They literally they could be twins. They could be literal straight up twins, in which case you're like, wait a second, what are we arguing about? But then this is why it's so complicated, because this really makes everyone have to question, what does identity mean? What is a nation? What is a nationality? How important are these things? How important are tribal affiliations? And then this is the creepy thing to me. I don't like it when a tribal affiliation supersedes the family structure. So then I don't really like this Israeli like national identity. I think the Jewish one is more fundamental. And then I don't really like this like Palestinian, I am a Palestinian. You're like, you both are. You're both as Israeli or Palestinian, really. Until you're like, oh no, but it means all these things. And I was like, maybe you're correct, but I'm not going to assume just because you're in it, you're right. I have myopia about the United States of America, and I'm willing to be corrected about my apprehensions about what it means to be an American, and like, but I think we have this weird, through this intersectional thing too, on the outside, people who are afraid of colonialism are like, oh, well, I don't, yeah, no, if you tell me how that's how it is. And you're like, well, but wait a second, you're already putting your colonial lens on it. Let's just let's figure it out. But this is why we have to talk. We got to figure it out. Like, what is a Palestinian? What does a Palestinian mean? And how does it differ from Israeli? Or maybe it doesn't. And this is my hope. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe we can realize you're actually not different. You're not.
No, I'm not. I'm glad you put it that way, because one of a good friend is Moroccan Canadian, and she's Muslim, a peacemaker. And, she is repeatedly says what it was like to grow up in Morocco.
Yeah.
learning that Muslims and Jews were cousins. You literally just said that, and
Yeah.
that's what it was to somebody so much closer than this,
Yeah.
closer to this than I
Yeah.
ever will be, albeit still not exactly in the thick of this exact region. But I love that you framed that as hope. I hold that as well.
Yeah. We
Um,
have to.
this maybe, yeah, I mean, I don't know. We're probably in a more of a coming in for a landing place here, but this could maybe be a teaser. I mean, this could be a 100-part episode, obviously.
It could.
Who knows if we're going to do another one, but or maybe we'll revisit it in a few months or something. I don't know. It's certainly, there's a lot here. Anyway, what I wanted to get at was something about Zionism, which is obviously an enormous topic and related to this, because that's an
Yes.
identity, and that relates to what you just said about Israel as a state versus or somehow in congruence with Judaism.
Yeah.
And I, again, anecdotally, is just pieces I pick up here and there. And I think I asked you this, but we've had such a flood of texts. I admit I haven't actually even read everything, but I remember somebody referencing the Bible to suggest that, you know, the way I think what I heard was that God's decree, I guess, for the Jews was that they weren't meant to have their own land until Jesus returned or until God came. So this reveals some of my ignorance about, you know, the Bible to begin with. But
Yeah.
Can you reflect on that at all from your?
Sure. Yeah. Well, that's another thing. I was like, a lot of this is another just argument I don't like. So I got to throw it out there, and I'd like people to stop saying it. Is people just all say, and I've seen this literally as a meme or even like an infographic frequently shared. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. I disagree with that. I think ultimately we're talking about two different Zionistic groups here. As you know anecdotally, right? That they want, like, folks want Jerusalem. That's just Muslim Zionism. So it's Zionists versus Zionists here. Let's not pretend that Palestine isn't also Zionists. They have the same holy scriptures. The Injil is what they refer to, the sort of scriptures prior to Muhammad's revelations. I contend, and that I grew up in a Christian context, meaning I've gone to church like throughout most of my life. And when I would say in the church, there is a sharp generational difference between like the boomers, Gen X is kind of somewhere in the middle, but by millennials, the millennial and boomer difference on Israel is super different. Boomers are like, support Israel no matter what, because there's like scripture verses basically like, if you stand against God's people, you're in trouble. I think that's true about God's people, which is Jews. Not all Israel is Israel. Not all Israel is he or she who wrestles with God. Israel in the modern sense is mostly a atheistic nation. So claiming that the promises of a God you don't believe in, that doesn't even make any sense. Obviously, their claim to the region in terms of what God promised, this is the Old Testament is like a ton of God freeing people from slavery and then helping them conquer. He didn't just deliver them to the promised land. He'd refine them as a people and killed a bunch of them and let a bunch of them get killed and then killed a whole bunch of people on the way there. But he helped basically a former slave people. It's a pretty great underdog oppressed narrative. Conquer their way just completely beyond reason. Like a slave people shouldn't, made to be fit or whatever. But it literally is like, imagine this in America. That's almost like if God took like black folks in the South and was like trotted them around, giving them no land. But meanwhile, they managed to conquer 7 or 8 states. They conquered the entire American South. You're like, how did they do that? You're like, I don't know. The divine intervention of some sort is involved here. Or they were just so desperate that they had to win. So that's what Israel did. They conquered their way all the way to basically this whole area on the coast and near the river. The river's huge. You're in a desert, folks. If you head like super west away from that river, it gets bleak. It gets real hard to survive. We've all seen the footage, right? People running away. You're like, that just looks like sand. The river's huge because things can grow near running water. And then the ocean's there so you can trade. So this is just like, this is a powerful piece of real estate pragmatically. And it was delivered to the people of Israel They planted the temple, the sort of tabernacle they used to carry around where God's presence came, used to move with them throughout the desert as they conquered all these other peoples inexplicably. But then they came to Jerusalem and like didn't have to keep conquering. So in some ways it was a great ending. It was like, here we're finally in a place where we can build walls and just be safe. We don't have to keep going out and hurting people. But people kept trying to kill them, and they got taken out of that region many different times. But God gave them that place, and they put the temple there. And essentially, Israel is wherever the temple is, where the tabernacle is. The hard thing with Zionism, and this is why I just kind of reject Zionism currently, is that there's no temple. There's no temple. It got destroyed by the Romans, whatever it was, like 70 something AD, and it doesn't exist anymore. So the Israel's claim to like, are they going to rebuild the temple? If they were doing that, you could make a Zionist thing that like, here's where we're going to take the Lord's promised land and do what we promised the Lord we would do here. But as millennials and myself as a Gen X in between, instead of just going rah-rah, is whatever Israel does is good, I was like, well, but this is not Israel really. Israel is not ancient Israel, meaning the people of God. Israel means like sort of he who wrestles with God. And they're not wrestling with God, really. They're just a nation. You know what I mean? They're just they're not doing it anymore. Just like people over here in the United States are like, we have lost our way. We used to be, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created by equal and endowed by their creator. And once you leave that format, you're not really doing the same thing anymore. That's what I would contend about Zionism from a Christian perspective, is Jews aren't the people who are promised Zion. But the problem is they believe that they still are promised this area. And Muslims believe the same thing by their sacred scriptures, that they're promised sort of this area, which is like, that's why, again, this is a phenomenally religious conflict fundamentally, and why I don't really think it's going to end. And sadly, no one's going to be free. The thing is, like, is Palestine going to be free? Is Israel going to be free? I don't see it. I don't see it as an option, sadly, for either people. But I do want to hold, like I said, I want to be a hopeful person. And so I don't want to cease to like talk with people and advocate and hold space and pray and speak, like whatever, from where I am, as far away as I am, all I can do is try to like figure out what the truth is and speak truth and speak hope to people,
Yeah.
But without a temple, it doesn't really make any sense. And I would just contend, I think the Muslims' claim on that area is malarkey. Because it came later, and I just don't buy Muhammad's claim on that area, because he also altered it. So he's like, Muhammad was like basically sort of like a glommed onto the Jews, right? And then just kind of like Jews and Christians have had like a weird antagonism, because Christians are just Jews who believe the Messiah already came, and then Muslims are pretty much Christians and Jews who then believe that like Muhammad was yet another prophet, was like the last prophet, kind of like Muslims, kind of like Mormons, y'all, in that like Joseph Smith was like the final prophet of God. It was like, oh, there's one more. And then like Muhammad sort of conquered his way into an area, and then a lot of people started following him. But he was like, oh, the Jews know God. Like Muhammad believed essentially that like the Jews were the chosen people of God, and that they kind of in Christ, but in general, rejected God. And he's like, I'm picking up. It's almost like Muhammad was almost like, not quite, this is going to offend people, and I hope it does, because that's funny when people get offended by things that are true. It's not terribly dissimilar from some of the like Black Hebrew Israelite things, where it's like Muhammad is like, we're picking up the trail. The Jews dropped it. We're picking it, or like they fumbled the ball, so we're picking it up. But he would have people pray like the multiple times a day. They would pray towards Jerusalem. So he's like, because that's where God came and visited human beings in the temple like once a year. Because that's part of what the temple sort of is for God to come in physical, like palpable form once a year. However, at some point later, he then said, okay, now from now on, you can pray. I think it was like 3 different places. You can pray to Mecca, you can pray to Jerusalem, or you can pray to where my mosque is. So he kind of, to me, I was like, he kind of just inserted himself into the tradition. I felt like it was a branding exercise of like drafting onto basically another religion that kind of already existed. And he would say, I think Muslims would suggest, yes, he was doing that, but God told him to do it. Whereas I was like, I don't know if that's true. So then I was just like, it just seems like a crafty maneuver. But again, that's how far back fighting over this area goes, and how deep it is. That you're like, God told us this is ours. So again, I think in terms of what a Palestinian is, and there are obviously some Christians there, but it is dominantly Muslim. So I think this is really actually mostly it is not really a national thing so much it is an actually religious conflict more than anything, ideologically.
And what was the time period for Muhammad?
Muhammad is what, 500 or is there 15? I can't, he's like 500. What is it? 80? Muhammad started doing stuff.
Yeah, we should drop that on the timeline. I don't know that that's there, but that sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah, five. So well, he died in 632. I'm just going to do it just to be a jerk. In 632 AD, but you could refer that as CE if you were a classic, secular anthropologist. Yeah, so 500, let's say like 400 years post Christ, 2000 year. He lived 2000 years after Israel as a nation in this region where Jerusalem was established. But I think he is ultimately he's the dominant figure here. Oh, this is one of the things you said I think was interesting too. Is the side you can respond obviously to my extended monologue, but answering the Zionism question. But it was interesting. One of the things that you said of like kind of seeing people kind of respond in a very binary, like they're clearly the oppressor, the oppressed, therefore they're the ones who are right here. Kind of underdog thinking, intersectional thinking, that sort of thing. It was interesting because Elon Musk came under a ton of fire in the past couple of weeks for essentially agreeing with that premise that Jewish, now his claim was that Jewish organizations had been fostering this dialectic understanding of like oppressor oppressed, and now Jews in America are like suffering from it because they're like, wait a second, we're not oppressors, but they're the ones who introduce education through anti-racism training, intersectionality training, that sort of thing. They've sort of introduced the ideology that has now come home to roost, and then they're really upset about it because now everyone's anti-Israel because they identify Israel on that, within that paradigm. And people thought it was controversial that he agreed with that. And I was just like, well, wait a second, it's as plain as day. Like, I don't even understand how anyone would argue with that. Like, that's intersectional thought is very palpably part of the American reaction right now in terms of this. Like, that's why we're using terms like people use marginalized people to describe Palestinians, and people use, you know what I mean? We're using all the terminology and everything that we're like, that people recently got trainings in the past 4 to 6 years. So I did think it was fascinating that people label that anti-Semitic, which I think for the pro-Israeli people, since I didn't fully mention it, that's the most dubious argument I see on that side, is how basically anything that criticizes Israel or says something completely obvious, like that the things people have been training in the past 4 to 6 years, even at Jewish organizations. The ADL is one example of people who like put forward anti-racist learnings. That's part of the paradigm by which Israel is judged to be an oppressor, you know what I mean, or closer to power, and therefore sort of like a less reliable source or less cheerable. It's harder to cheer for them, but you cheer for their quote unquote, and it makes them the victimizers or the colonizers or the oppressors or whatever. So, anyways, interesting to hear you say that. So you're going to start losing advertisers because X has been losing advertisers left and right.
Oh goodness! Well,
there go your advertisers, Andy.
We're going to have to go off the air. Yeah, no, that's something that really just grates me about this whole thing, and I just try to go to a lens of I guess trauma awareness and compassion for, quote unquote Israel, which is a strange thing to say because that's, to your point earlier from your wife, it's like, well, Israel is a nation, and do we say the people of Israel? And I think that's one of the separations that's probably healthy to make, is there's plenty of Israeli people living in Israel who have been protesting this, especially this right-wing government, long before this war. I mean, it's not like it's, I guess, I think something we share is an attempt to step away from monolithic thinking. So there's plenty of people. It bothers me when this anti-Semitism is sort of thrown around like this force field that is impenetrable, and I just have, the only way I can find compassion for that is to relate it to the trauma, that rather extraordinary trauma that has been that Jewish folks have suffered under for forever. and that doesn't excuse the behavior or the outcomes, right? So
No.
how do we hold trauma and accountability, in both of our hands at the same time?
Yeah. It's heavy. It's a heavy burden. Well, and it's a challenge. And I think that some people, even by virtue of stress, want to shirk that challenge. And other people, I think there's plenty of people who just get really excited as an because I've watched this the past 3 or 4 years. We've talked about multi formats or multiple, what's the word, sort of revelations. Is people love any system of ideology that will enable them to go, you're bad, you're gross, you're terrible, I'm good, you're bad. And I see that when people trot out Islamophobia, anti-vax, whatever, Islamophobic, you're an Islamophobe, you're a homophobe, you're a transphobe, you're anti-Semitic. You're just like, you hate. So wait, your reaction is, I hate you and everyone like you on some sort of standard of identity that we can barely even acknowledge fully exists. We're still trying to understand what it even means. Like, what, like, how, what, where are you at? But that's I do think it can come from a sloth in dealing with like whatever trauma you might have.
And it seems like, I think I mentioned this before, but in the book The Dawn of Everything,
Mm,
there's this term schismogenesis, and
mm,
that they use. It's a sort of a new look at anthropology, um, and this idea that for whatever reason, in many human populations and cultures throughout history, or even if you shrink that to sort of just a family unit, like two
yeah,
siblings
yeah,
are going to sort of start defining themselves differently,
yeah,
because that's one of the ways we define ourselves. So what you're saying is, well, yeah, if I like find a reasonable way to make you look bad, hopefully, I think deep down part of the desire there is hopefully that'll make me the good guy, right?
yeah, yeah. Well, and I think that's the thing that happens simplistically with identifying with either Israel or Palestine. As people get super vehement, they've, I think people have discovered a false religion, like us, in terms of, if I correctly identify who the bad guy is and oppose them, then I'm good. If I correctly identify who's the good guy here and support them, I'm good. Now, that has some grain of truth in it, right? There's a rattle out, like a couple little dry grains of rice in there. That's true. That's kind of a true thing, right? To support that which is just, and to oppose that which is unjust is also just. But when it's just people group based, or like, let's not pretend, like the complexity of nations and or groups of people who hate each other for good reasons and bad reasons, and love each other for good reasons and bad reasons, that like to simply like identify basically who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, and if I good, then I'm good. But you also, the cool thing is, this is the hope part, the through line is, even when you're in direct opposition to someone, look at that common thread. There is the desire to be good. We have this adamant desire to be good, and not just good. I think, well, this is the problem. It can tend to, I'm desire to be known as good. And I was like, that's problematic. Let's step back from that a little bit. The desire to be good, to like see things rightly, fight for what's right, and embrace what's good and cast out what's bad. Heck yeah. I feel like we all can agree with that. That's really what we're all trying to do. And so then we really should just be able to freely share how we identify what's bad and why it's bad. And this is why I think disputing like poor arguments is helpful, because you're like, okay, that's not the way. Let's find the way together. It's not that, it's not that, it's not that. I'm gonna throw out 6 of your arguments, 4 of yours. Now what can we do? So what's good? You know, what can we celebrate, and what can we identify as truly bad? So I don't know, it's terrible but good all at once.
So I think to that point, we've only cleaned one little corner of the room, as you started out by
Yeah,
suggesting today.
yeah.
Maybe, I don't know, or at least we like swept that stuff under to a different part of the room.
Yes.
One thing that came out that is, I don't know that I expected, is it sounds like we both favor a one state solution. We both favor some form of all of the folks in this region coming together to actually create a meaningful government. And then in this moment, one of the reasons I think that's the only way is we touched on sort of the state of Palestine and the kind of stunting of economic growth. and infrastructure
Yeah.
and even job skills and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm like, yeah. So coming back to our question is, can Palestine be free? It's like, well, if we waved a magic wand and that happened today, and let's say that means that Palestine has a clear national identity and the West Bank and Gaza are reunited. Let's even like use that magic wand to go ahead and rebuild all the infrastructure.
Yeah.
There's still this extraordinary imbalance of power and sort of access to the world economy and
Yeah.
diplomacy and all sorts of things.
Internally and externally, like you talked about. Like even if all the if they had where they were allowed free Congress, but I feel like the thing you can't just give. I was like, the reason nobody wants Palestinians to leave is because nobody trusts them. Nobody trusts them. I mean, listen, there's plenty of I say that to both. You can say it to both. Like if you're Israeli, there's tons of countries uh, you can't go to. Artie grew up in Dubai, and like you couldn't have an Israel stamp in your passport and get into Dubai. They wouldn't allow you in.
Yeah.
So Israel, the same thing. I was like, you have to look at this. Palestinians, this is why Palestinian Jews are not that different. Meaning, like Jews have suffered in countries around the world. And so like there's something up with Jews where people don't like them. Now, they would contend it's because they're God's chosen people and everyone hates God and wants to destroy them. I think would be their cogent defense. It's like, well, yeah, people don't like good people. That's totally true. So it could be that. Or something about you sucks, right? As like a culture, as a people group, right? Same thing with Americans. We're not out of this. The ugly American is a common overseas trope of like, you're just gross. You don't speak the language. You don't try to acculturate. You eat too much. You're fat. You can't fit up the stairwells. You can't ride in the cabs because you're too, you know what I mean? There's like, but this isn't just like, oh, anti blah, blah, blah. I was like, no, people groups are like this. Some families are like this. Don't pretend if you grew up in a neighborhood, you didn't know who the family, like the slobby families were, who were like hard to deal with. You're like, oh, the flipping McNamara boys. I can't with them anymore. Whatever. It's just, this is normal. This is how people, but Palestine's similar, right? We're like, Egypt doesn't want them coming in. They're like, no, y'all are a mess. A, we don't want your enemies after us, but also we don't really like you either. You guys are, and I've shared with you too, some like regional responses that I had no idea how much people hate Palestine. Like how many different countries have kicked Palestinians out? Hundreds of thousands of them have like, as many have been kicked out of this sort of Gaza and region, have been kicked out of other countries, and no one seems to say boo about it, which is why I think a lot of activists, I just don't really care. I don't think a lot of activists are actually involved with what they're talking about. They just like being mad about stuff, which I get. It's fun. But people don't like Palestinians. Like something about them as a culture kind of sucks a little bit. Just like something about Israeli obviously sucks a little bit because people are always trying to kill you. And people don't want Palestine. And so even if Palestine was free, meaning like, let's say they took all the border walls down and they were just allowed to freely pass back and forth, that might not help them at all. It might hurt them because the more they can move out, the more people don't like them. Like people in that region, Arab states consider Palestinians kind of like a mongrel people, as far as I understand it. They're like gypsies and Arabs, and they're kind of mixed blood. Again, they call that area Philistia. We know Philistine is like kind of a derogatory term. They're like Philistine. They're like not. And of course there's the Shia Sunni thing, and so whichever, those guys hate each other. Those Muslims hate each other. They're constantly trying to kill each other, and so like how are they going to get free? They've had billions and 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 billions of dollars poured into Gaza over the past number of decades, and that hasn't made it better. So in some ways, that's good. Humanitarian aid doesn't help. Money doesn't help. So that's great. Which is, to me, I'm like, we have to try other things. This is the problem of keep returning to the same thing. Two-state solution. Here's my proposal. Here, guys, I'm going to fix everything. You ready? I have no authority here. Israel is no longer, we don't call it Israel anymore. Palestine, we don't call it Palestine anymore. That was just a colonial term for the region anyway. So once again, if you call yourself a Palestinian and you're a Muslim, that's twice you've accepted occupation and you've accepted colonialism. So Israel has the best claim. The whole area should be Israel. That's the most tenable option, because Palestine is a less tenable option. They're both arguable, but it should be Israel. Or no more Israel, no more Palestine. You return this all, call it Canaan again, because that's what it was like 2,000 plus years ago. The Canaanites were basically, it was like an overarching term for all the people in that area. And you just call it Canaan again, and we try to, I don't know. And then I don't know from there how you figure it out. But if nothing else, we got rid of the branding. I was like, sorry. And then Israel will therefore only refer to the people who obey Yahweh, which is really kind of most tenably what it always meant anyway. So that's a more fundamental definition. And Palestinians are going to just have to stop calling them Palestinians, but they shouldn't call themselves that anyway. That's like, but listen, some Indians do it here, but it's kind of like indigenous people, Lakota, calling themselves Indians. So
yeah, they've been taken back. By my understanding, currently,
yeah,
American Indian is like the
yeah, they
again,
like it. Yeah,
again,
like,
I'm sure not everybody agrees on it, but
no,
generally,
no, no. Everyone argues about it, I'm sure. But yeah, no, I don't think a two-state solution makes any dang sense at all. I don't think it's going to work because it hasn't worked. They've been attempting it poorly. I think that's the thing. People are like, they just haven't tried it the right way.
And obviously, we are here to tell everybody the right way. So to land the plane,
Yep.
can Palestine be free? I'm gonna cheat and slightly adjust the question. So actually, to that question, I'm gonna say no at this point, based on everything we've talked about and the idea of quote unquote Palestine. To cheat a little, I'm gonna adjust the question and say, can Palestinians be free? And I'm gonna, through the lens of hope, say absolutely yes, because I hope all people can be free. And that's what I fight for.
If you adjust to that, I would say they already are. They're already free. And I think that's a thing we all need. I think that's what I haven't been in prison, and I'm sure it's much harder. I don't think, again, that's another thing I think is completely open air prison. I was like, if you have a tourist industry, you're not an open air prison. So like that was another hogwash thing. But like if I was in prison, I think it would be harder for me to be seen as free. But I've read enough letters from prison to know that you can be free there too. So there is Palestinians are free right now. They're as free as as their minds will allow. Slaves can be free. I'm a slave of Christ. I mean, literally, I'm an avowed. I'm just like I said, a slave of Allah. I'm a slave of Yahweh. The Bible is super crystal clear. Every Christian is a slave of God. I was formerly a slave of sin. Now I'm God's slave. Am I also free? Yes, I am. I am free indeed. So I'm a slave and free all at the same time. Those aren't mutually exclusive concepts. So yes, can Palestinians be free? They're free right now, and I'm happy, and I want them to be. I mean, I don't want them to be free to be doing bad things, but I want them free to be as good and amazing as they are in whatever disgusting circumstance they're in. And even so, I want Israel to be free. I don't think Israel is especially more free than Palestinians are. I think it's this. Yeah. And also, once again, I think we both agree, the Palestine-Israel problem, conflict, war, everything, it sucks and I hate it. I think we agree on that.
We agree on that, and maybe taking a bit more literal approach. But I have sadness right now because of a friend I met who's working with this group in Palestine, who's been trapped in the West Bank his entire life, has been unable to. He was actually in tangible, what we call prison, but then metaphorically, I think of the West Bank as a prison. Has been trying for the last few weeks to get a visa to the U.S. And we just found out yesterday it's not going to happen yet again. And so, there's something. I hear what you're saying, and part of what is emerging for me as a token of freedom is the ability to move freely about through borders. So I don't think they're free in that way.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Well, because this goes back to our thing. Oh, well, this is maybe the last question. So like, so this is the big question I had, because you're more in the activist community than I am. If like being able to freely kind of move from place to place is considered not free, and the freedom that like people are advocating for, because I think I would agree with you, that seems to be what people are advocating for. Like when unvaccinated people couldn't move from place to place, country to country, couldn't leave countries, why weren't the people who are mad now mad then? And so that's one of the things when I see, because I know literally, I'm talking about people I know personally. This is through social media or whatever, but I know these people in real life. When I like see them being mad about those types of things, I was like, I don't believe you actually care about that. Like, because when it happened to us, when we couldn't freely travel or freely walk into a place, we couldn't get on a plane. Like you couldn't travel to countries. You couldn't come into this country. We blocked everyone. And then you were like, yes. So I was like, well, wait, why are you mad when they do it? Why were you happy when they did it to us here, but you're mad when they did it over there? I don't understand that part. I don't understand. And I don't understand how people internally rectify that within the activist community.
Because I don't think there's any good faith attempt to do so. I mean,
no, that's a shame. We can learn so much.
It is a shame.
Yeah.
No, I share little anecdotes with you of events that still require masks and whatnot. Even uh, protests there
Oh
was
yeah, yeah,
a
yeah.
few weeks ago I shared with you that required, it was a sit-in and it required masks to be worn. And I just feel, I mean, we've talked about this at such length. I don't know that we need to go deep, but and I attempted to raise this issue in one of my activist communities and was
Yeah.
pretty aggressively, very aggressively, actually shut down for that, which was sort of shocking and created a lot of disillusion, and it was never really satisfied in any way. You helped me actually kind of construct arguments to all these questions that were being posed, and the thing was I had used the term vaccine segregation,
Yeah.
and the I was called in, quote unquote,
Oh, yeah, I like that phrase.
for using the term segregation,
Yeah.
because it's like, oh no, we need to reserve segregation for, I don't know if this is exactly the language, but
Yeah.
the intention was like for quote unquote real segregation,
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
like black people in America.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah. But then
because
they'll,
the
yeah.
identity of this particular group is white men, so it's like we're so like over like hyperly sensitive to,
Yeah.
oh my god, we have to like only, and some of it's out of respect. I mean, it's complex. Some of it is
Yeah.
genuine respect and
Yeah.
knowledge of what happened in the US, and
Yeah.
some of it is like so sort of overstated and misplaced in the sense that, wait, why is like an anarchist group adhering to populist opinion about what keeps us safe? That's the only explanation I can keep giving you, Brendan, because I've
Yeah.
lived
Yeah.
in these circles for so long, is that it's a populist opinion about what keeps us safe, and
Yeah.
that's the justification for all of it. Now I know you've done gobs of research to say, well, that's just not rational,
Yeah. Yeah. But
but
that's
here
the
it is.
claim. Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, this is the great thing. It does help us understand it helps us understand Israel even more than anybody, where it's like all this like stuff. You're like all this in the West Bank, I would call it apartheid. In the West Bank, I would call it colonization. In Gaza, I wouldn't. I think apartheid and colonization is completely inappropriate there. They're just literally maintaining borders. And so I was like, I mean, I think it's an overly strict anti-immigration policy, I guess is what you would call it, in terms of like keeping people out. And I don't like it. And I also just think there's a hateful cultural thing in Israel against people in Gaza that I don't like. I think it's gross. Um, but since we can understand then that because they're like, okay, well, here are all the terrible things we have to do to keep us safe. And it doesn't matter whose rights we trample on, and it doesn't matter who we treat like trash, because it's all to keep us safe. That's absolutely what Israel is saying. It's the same argument. So in that way, we can understand those arguments. Yeah, the thing because you got such a crummy blowback that I was like, well, wait, are any of those same people using like language like apartheid or segregation or genocide or that sort of colonization or whatever in the Israel Palestine? Are some of the same people having those all of a sudden not caring how careful you use words anymore as it relates to Israel and Palestine? In which case I'm like,
100%,
so I was like, wait a second.
like 1,000%. Like
Yeah. So yeah, yeah.
there's
So I was like
there's a
that.
Jewish guy in the group who's
Yeah.
like, which I mean I appreciate that, but
Yeah.
he's sort of talking a lot about how challenging it is to be a Jew, speaking out against genocide. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
language.
So yeah. So I was like, that's the thing I don't know. I just don't that part really has been bugging me. I just say this. Actually, this is my warning as a semi-centrist, or maybe I just delude myself. I'm a centrist. I'm willing to accept that I'm delusional. Is I've been talking to you about this too, Andy. As I was like, especially people advocating for Palestine, you're doing yourself a disservice by using incautious language, and there's a lot that needs to be like clarified in terms of the reliability of your narration. If you've then previously been advocating, you're now basically advocating against that which you advocated for with no apology or explanation. And then likewise, if you're wearing masks, I said the same thing. I was like, hey, if you're going to Palestinian protests, stop wearing masks, guys. If you want to get people on your side and make you think you're reasonable assessors of what's transpiring, just stop wearing masks. It's not helping you. All that's doing is telling a very small slice of the population that you're like them. It's a tribalistic signifier, but you're alienating most people because most people don't wear them anymore because they realize they're not really relevant. And I think most people realize they never really were that relevant, and then no one really wants. And then I'd say the majority just doesn't even want to examine it beyond that. They're like, oh, I guess it didn't help that much. But all right, well, we're done now. Stop doing it. Like, it's hurting your cause enormously. It's at this point, I shared a couple things with you. I was like, multiple people have referred to masks as like the KKK hood of the progressive anti-Semitic movement.
Whoa.
Like, it's a powerful signifier. It's like it's not helping anyone. It's harming your cause so much, to use poor language. And I want the cause to be heard. I want the like pro-Palestinian, like advocating for people who are subjugated, some by their own choice. I think obviously we looked at the polling that like 70-something% of people support Hamas in Gaza. So Hamas is Palestine, Hamas is Gaza, and they like them. So it's not just like, oh my gosh, but there's plenty of people who don't. You know what I mean? And then so I want all the people who like Hamas and don't like Hamas to like have a chance to like live long enough to be different, to have a different life, and to have a better life, and have a more free life. But I noticed those two concerns were starting to drive me crazy. Whereas I'm just like, but I don't want to be the person who's like, just because someone has a bad argument or is a hypocrite doesn't mean their argument is wrong. You know what I mean? I want to be able to hold that, like the multiplicities of that like
Or
just someone,
certainly something we both hold is that none of this makes anybody disposable, right? And that's
yes, exactly. Yeah.
one of the challenges with the language and some of the stuff or the energy of some of these protests. You start to think, yeah, gosh, are they in some way, directly or indirectly, actually advocating for people being disposable?
Yeah, that's the thing. Let's not become those that we oppose.
Well, that's a good note to land on.
Yay,
my friend.
I love you very much. We solved it.
Done. You're welcome.
You're welcome. Freedom for all. Ugh.